First, I want to talk about what's happening with this administration and the shutdown and the way in which Trump seems to just be singing the same refrain over and over. It's the Democrats, the Democrats, the Democrats. He literally said the Democrats are responsible for it all. Polling suggests that that's not quite getting through to the American people, and that increasingly the GOP is going to bear some political responsibility on this issue.
Well, given that the Republicans control the White House, the House, and the Senate, it's a little hard to make that argument. And I would point out that the Inflation Reduction Act, the most significant piece of legislation in the Biden administration, Nancy Pelosi got through the House when she had a majority of, I believe, 3 votes. The most of the period this year, the Democrats were behind, I think it's by 5 votes, but it was 3 or more throughout that period. And it's their inability in the Republican side to be unified. And you're seeing bit by bit parts of the MAGAverse come apart. For example, Marjorie Taylor Greene, a wealthy woman who represents a really poor district, recognizes that since more than 40% of the people in her district depend on Medicare, and I suspect an even larger number than that in at least now and then on food banks and SNAP, that there's a real threat to her in getting reelected if she were to be tarred with these enormous increases in premiums for the Affordable Care Act. I suspect, although they have never said this publicly, that the people around Trump, particularly Russell Vought, who runs the Office of Management and Budget, a very powerful federal agency, that they have looked upon closing the government and taking away the tax credits for the poor and the working poor as a way to kill the Affordable Care Act. The problem with killing the Affordable Care Act is that if you narrow the number of people who have access to medical care, your cost per person goes up. And that means that those people who have health insurance, like you and me, we're going to pay more to make up for this unless we get rid of excess capacity, remove doctors and stuff. We don't have an excess capacity problem. The bizarre thing the Democrats seem utterly incapable of doing is explaining to the American public that universal care is cheaper. And give you my favorite little number here. If we had the French healthcare system, which is every study I've ever read on the quality of healthcare says the French have the best system in the world. I've used it once. I was very impressed. I have friends who've used it for various reasons. First-rate care, you get seen quicker than here. Nobody goes bankrupt because of medical bills. Nobody is forced into premature retirement because they get an injury and they don't have the money to get their injury properly repaired. If we had the French medical system, it would save an amount of money equal to all the income taxes paid by everyone who makes under $600,000 a year. So unless you make over $600,000 a year, at least on paper, statistically, you could stop paying income taxes. Now, as a practical matter, it probably set the threshold for income taxes, which for a married couple right now is right around $30,000. We could probably raise it to somewhere between $100,000 and $200,000. But that's how much waste there is. Moving to the French system would cause some problems. An awful lot of people who were employed as clerks, all that paperwork you have to fill out and fight with just to get paid for routine things, those people would be gone, and we would have to find a way to create new jobs for them or support them in some way. But we're ridiculously overspending on healthcare. And I literally had one of Ronald Reagan's advisors, Norman Toure, who's dead now, some years ago when he and I were on a panel in Washington, D.C., and I recommended this idea. And he went, "Oh, you want to put all of those inner city mothers who work at insurance companies out of work." And of course, that was code for black. And I said, "Yeah, Norman, in the same way that I'm not in favor of eliminating mechanized earth moving equipment and saying we're going to construct buildings by digging the basements with shovels, But if you want to create jobs that way, we could do that. And we could maybe, if that doesn't create enough jobs, we could go from shovels to garden trowels and keep going till we get down to moving earth with Demitasse spoons. I mean, if you approach thoughtfully and follow the logic of the Republican opposition to universal health care, we don't want colored people to have health care, and that's their word, colored, not mine. Then that's where you end up. You end up with absurdities and ridiculousness and excess costs and worse health and shorter lives. And the rest of the modern world, longevity is increasing. We've been increasing slower than the rest of the world. And now for some demographic groups, including white, middle-aged, blue-collar men, we're going backwards. Lives are getting shorter.
It's so true that the American system is so broken. And even Obamacare, ACA, I had an issue with because it keeps the insurance companies in the game. Now, I understand why, because you have to make, in this setup, you have to make a deal with the insurance companies because there's so much money and they have really bought a lot of American politics. But the idea that there even exists this middleman, I'll just use it kind of generally, the insurance companies are just taking a piece. I mean, they are an added part of the American healthcare system, David, that need not exist. In the system that you're describing, they wouldn't exist.
Health insurance is an absolutely superfluous business. So, by the way, is land title insurance. We can talk about that another day, because instead of paying $1,000 as I'm about to pay for a land title insurance, literally banks would give it away if we changed the system. And this is the health insurance. An insurance company's business is to try and not pay claims. That's how they make a profit. I teach my students the difference between a bank and an insurance company is you make a deposit. We call a deposit at the bank a premium at the insurance company. At the bank, you get your money back whenever you ask, unless you sign some agreement to tie your money up. Maybe you get a higher interest rate. At the insurance company, it's on event. And the issue is the insurance company decides what the event is, not you. And, we had a Dr. Linda Pino, a Kentucky physician who testified under oath to Congress, 30 years ago now almost, that every time she killed someone by finding a way to deny the health care they needed, she got a bonus. And she testified about how she denied a heart transplant to a man in California, where, by the way, she was not licensed to practice medicine. And her insurance company paid her a bonus. This got almost no coverage at the time. It's in my book, Free Lunch. But this was, remember, the Republicans used to say, well, if you have socialized medicine, you'll have death panels. We have death panels, corporate death panels. And if we're going to have somebody decide who can live and die, I think I'd rather have the government decide that than a corporation motivated by profit. But beyond that, it is just nutty to say we're going to deny health care to people. I wrote years ago about a man, I'm trying to remember who put me onto it. There was a man in Idaho whose hand got smashed in a machine at work. And workers' comp in Idaho took the position that their only obligation was to sort of patch him up and make sure that he wouldn't lose his hand to infection. They would not pay the $15,000 surgical fee, so there would have been other fees on top of that, for surgery so he could go back to work. Well, that means that the good conservative Republican citizens of Idaho had decided to turn this man from a taxpayer into a tax eater because he went on disability. And the denying health care to people for profit is a morally impossible situation to justify. I mean, Adam Smith told us about this in 1755, his first book, The Theory of Our Moral Sentiments. And it's essentially about this curious thing about the human condition. We honor and admire wealthy people just for having money. And we despise poor people for what he called their mean condition. And he's not talking about the numerical mean. He means nasty, horrible lives. And it's at the bottom, at the end of the day, this is a moral issue. And the ACA was a political, reasonable way to deal with what could be done, because politics is the art of the possible. But things have gotten so bad, maybe we can finally get universal no out-of-pocket health care. And if we did, it would help bring costs down. There are lots of doctors who would have been against this not many years ago, but who are all fed up now with they have the same paperwork problem you have, but instead of, once a month for something, it's every single day.
No,
Just
they've had
ask
to
your
put it.
doctor,
They've
hey,
had
how much do you like dealing with the insurance company, doc?
Yeah, it's they've had to build in bureaucracies to their own practices, and many just
Yeah.
aren't doing it anymore. That's exactly right. And so we get to the SNAP benefits, which are adjacent to this, in addition to the ACA subsidies. And the SNAP benefits seem to reflect in the resistance to pay SNAP benefits, the resistance to even break the reserve fund to stop the bleeding during this period of the government shutdown. That resistance is so consistent with the narrative that you're describing, which it seems so, it's cruel to the point, it's like out of an old Charles Dickens story, it's so villainous. I don't quite understand how they can even argue. It seems like an odd argument to make.
Well, and it's part of a larger theme that's been missed. Donald Trump said again and again in his campaign in 2015 and 16, wages are too high. Seriously, wages are too high. That should tell you a lot of what you need to know. And yet people who have miserable wages and will tell you their wages aren't so good, a lot of them support Donald Trump. And that goes to his argument, I love the poorly educated because they don't understand what I'm up to. In the case of SNAP benefits, the question we ought to be asking first and foremost is, why do we have 42 million Americans on supplemental nutrition assistance and another 5 or 6 million on women, infants, and children? So almost 50 million people in total in a country of 340 million people. That's 1 in 7. Well, the reason is the minimum wage has been fixed at $7.25 an hour since January 1 of 2009, when George Bush was still president. If you're a wait staff person, a bartender, a waitress or a waiter, anybody who gets tips, your minimum wage, unless you live in a place like California or New York with a separate state law, is $2.13 an hour. And the inflation effect of that is, compared to 1993, it's 94 cents an hour today, 94-cent minimum wage. And Donald Trump says that's too high. And by the way, the way it gets made up is from $2.13 to $7.25. That's $5 an hour, roughly. The first $5 an hour you get in tips go to meet the $7.25 an hour minimum. And the idea that raising the minimum wage will ruin jobs has been disproven in numerous ways, but one is a great one is San Jose. San Jose spreads out like a cancer cell across the Santa Clara Valley, with all these little towns, Los Gatos and Campbell and Santa Clara, rubbing up against it in various ways. And San Jose imposed a higher minimum wage than the state of California. So how many people going out to dinner, for waiters and waitresses and bartenders? So how many people going out to dinner said, oh, we don't want to pay more for the workers, so we're going to drive out past the city boundary and we'll go to dinner in Saratoga or in Sunnyvale? Nobody. The data is very clear. Nobody. So why are so many people of modest means listening to a party and a president who want to take away their health care, want to take away any food benefits, want their wages to go down or at least not rise? It tells you how much Americans are failing in their duty to be citizens and to understand our democracy so that we can govern ourselves well. Sadly,
I think it's even more just even understanding basic policy on issues that directly affect them, But yeah. I would also say that, it's interesting as you're talking about the way in which these monies are spread across communities. Walmart, for example, takes a huge hit with these SNAP benefits lapsing. Walmart is a huge beneficiary. They get 25% of all SNAP beneficiaries' money. So,
right. And many of their employees are on SNAP.
That's right.
They get benefits because Walmart is not required to pay a living wage. And when some people say, well, my business would fail if I had to pay a living wage, well, then, I would argue your business should fail. I mean, if you carry down the argument that I can't afford to pay my workers, then bring back slavery. And lo and behold, what do we find out? There are various Republicans out there in the background through chat rooms and other things who are saying, yeah, let's have slavery. The Republican Party ran as its candidate for governor of North Carolina, a man who said, yeah, I want to own a few slaves. He's black, by the way.
Yeah, that's right. That was an extraordinary thing. I'd forgotten about that
And
moment.
there were, by the way, there were some black people prior to the Civil War who owned slaves. It's not historically unprecedented in the United States.
So this brings me now to a question I can just digress to. It's not America yet, but it's been talked about. And in Europe, the momentum behind a tax on the wealthiest is really something that seems to have brought them to the point that it may happen. It was just voted down in France by a close margin. And the idea would be that you tax the wealthiest who have benefited the most, is the thinking. I think it's a reasonable kind of thinking. And in so doing, at even a very small rate, and this is stuff you've written chapter and verse on literally, and you can tell us the rate, you can offset so much of these weights on society, and you can permit so much, including a kind of socialized medicine or a kind of medicine that we could all enjoy at either widely discounted or for free. So my question to you is, has that time come, and might that be something that we could see in America as you kind of see the way in which public sentiment is shifting?
If you're a non-tax paying billionaire, you're going to love this idea. And it may shock you to hear that, but the reason is it won't work. It won't work. And first of all, I encourage your audience to read the book review I have at the Washington Monthly magazine that went up yesterday. It's on my Facebook page, facebook.com/David K, one word. The Washington Monthly has it. I mean, it's easy to find. Do a Google search with my name and Washington Monthly in quotes. The way the tax laws are written, Jeff Bezos qualified for Bill Clinton's child tax credit because under the tax law, he is a pauper. How do gazillionaires pose as paupers to the government? It's the way the law is written. You can't cure this, however, for a wealth tax, because if you own your wealth in, as Bezos does, publicly traded shares of Amazon, we know how much they're worth. We can calculate that. But most very wealthy people don't hold their money that way. They are in partnerships that are layered upon layered upon layered. So when the head of Ernst & Young, one of the big four accounting firms, came home and told his wife, I'm leaving you, and tried to, told her that all he could afford was $5,000 a month for her. And the next door neighbor set her straight about her husband has to be rich. They end up in court, and records are introduced into this court proceeding showing that he's actually worth $50 million. The judge, by the way, gave the wife 60% of it because of his bad conduct. But he's probably worth even much more than that. Very wealthy people organize their wealth so that they don't appear to be as wealthy as they are. There are many more billionaires in this country than Forbes magazine imagines. It's hard to value things. If you are invested in an investment pool that you can't cash out of for 7 years, how much is it worth today? It won't work.
The valuations I saw as a problem. They want to also, David, it's kind of what you're talking about. They want to tax assets that are not yet liquidated. So you're taxing value, which is
non-realized assets. But here's the way to solve this problem. And my next book will go into this and show how it's actually very simple. You and I, and almost everybody listening to this show, gets a wage or a pension check, and the government takes the taxes out of it before you get paid. Wealthy people just borrow against themselves. You can borrow against yourself right now for 4.53%. That's the government set minimum standard. The lowest tax you would pay if you're a super wealthy person is 23.8%. Why in the world would you pay 24% when you could pay less than 5%? You just borrow against your own money. And because your wealth is growing faster than you could ever spend it, you have this tax-free source of money. The solution to this is you can't borrow against your assets for your lifestyle. every time you want a dollar, you have to have the taxes withheld. America has two tax systems, separate and unequal. One is for wage earners and their like, and the other is for business owners, particularly real estate owners. And so what you want to do is make sure that any income you take, you want to buy a corporate jet, here it is. You got to pay the taxes on it. You want to buy your 9th mansion, the average billionaire owns 12 mansions. You're going to have to pay taxes before you can acquire your next mansion. And these are solvable problems, but unfortunately, a lot of people who don't understand tax or accounting or valuation, which, they're not easy. I've spent decades learning these things, and I learn new things all the time, by the way, still. We need a system that recognizes how this works. Then the other thing we have to end is this practice that if you want to make a charitable gift, first of all, for 95% of Americans under Trump's tax law, you won't get a tax deduction for it. You've been made ineligible for it. 95% of Americans. Secondly, if you do qualify, you can only give away a share of your income, a certain amount if it's to a private foundation, another a little bit more to a public charity. But when you die, you can give all of it away to a private foundation, never pay any taxes, which means we, the rest of us, whose society made your wealth possible, never get a dime, and your heirs get to decide how your money will be spent. You should be able to give away all your money when you die. I don't have any problem with that, but you should only get a tax deduction for 10% of the gift. You should pay taxes on your gains when you die.
Sure. And the idea or the argument from those who have a lot is, hey, I already paid taxes on that, but you're suggesting...
Which is nonsense.
Yeah,
absolute nonsense.
Right.
It's simply not true. I've shot that down in books and articles, and there's studies about it. There are pieces by academic economists, tax economists, that it's just nonsense. Bill Gates is a perfect example. Bill Gates started Microsoft with a loan from his parents of $50,000, a tax-free loan. So his basis in Microsoft stock, for all practical purposes, is zero. And Bill Gates, by the way, says, if we had a properly designed tax system, my fortune would be 1/3 the size that it is. At 1/3 the size, he'd still have somewhere in the neighborhood of $100 billion. So, you don't need to worry about him.
Wow. That's just wild, by the way, that the average billionaire has 12 residences. That's a wild statistic.
Yeah, it's from one of the companies that issues reports every year on billionaires, and they keep reporting this year after year when they survey people. It's 12 houses.
I want to quickly pivot to what's happening at the White House in sort of a superficial way, but I think, and I'm wondering if you agree with me, that there's a grift going on, and there's certainly a pay-to-play going on. There's certainly the shingle has been hung out since hour one at the White House. But the building of the ballroom, the redesign of that bathroom, I mean, that's just a typical crap. We don't even hear where that money came from. Presumably it's taxpayer money, et cetera. But more to the point, the ballroom, $200 million, $250 million, $300 million, $350 million. I mean, I don't know what they're building this ballroom out of, but it feels like it's cocaine bricks or something that is just insanely inflating the number, and which is why I think there are a couple of things going on that I want your reaction to. One is just the notion that, Trump can hatch this and he can just power it through, which he's done. He's completely demolished the East Wing to allow for this, breaking the promise he made that he wasn't going to touch the original structure. But also, and this is the point that I think is sort of the darker one, there's something going on here with that money. There's way more money, as I say, than should be allocated for something this size. I think maybe you can speak to this.
Well, there's no building I know of that costs $3,000 a square foot to build, particularly when most of it's a wide open space for dancing, a ballroom. That's just absurd. And so, one, don't believe the numbers here. Two, yes, Donald Trump is selling pardons. I mean, he's pardoned sexual predators. He just pardoned a guy who was involved in terrorist financing. And when Norah O'Donnell asked him about it on 60 Minutes, he went, I don't know anything about it. I don't know the guy. You pardoned him and you don't know anything? First of all, I don't believe you don't know anything. But secondly, you shouldn't be pardoning people if you don't know what the case is.
Well, it was the thing that he accused Biden of, which is that
Yes.
Biden didn't even know who he was pardoning.
Right.
He was doing it with an auto pen, and he was out of it. Yeah.
Yeah. And at the same time, by the way, Trump claimed when he was in his first term that he didn't even have to issue a written pardon. If he just said you're pardoned, you're pardoned. So Donald Trump's whole presidency is a grift. His family is raking in enormous sums of money. I mean, we're not talking about the kind of money that Don Rostenkowski, when he headed the House Ways and Means Committee, went to prison for. It was either $8,000 or $16,000. We've had all sorts of members of Congress. Look at Senator Bob Menendez, the Democrat from New Jersey. We're talking about a couple $100,000. We're talking here about literally billions of dollars to the Trump family. And the Republicans just go, I don't know anything about that. Mike Johnson, I don't know anything about that. The level of corruption, I mean, it's worse than I ever imagined it would be. And I was writing stories in the New York Times 25 years ago, quoting people saying we have a fundamental moral breakdown going on at the top of our society that you can see best in the law and accounting professions. And lots of evidence of that. And now, so the president is selling pardons to vicious criminals, people who've attacked police officers, child rapists, people who arrange financing for drug lords and terrorist organizations. Where's the moral outrage from John Q. Citizen? Where are the pastors and the rabbis and the imams saying to their congregations, this is immoral, this is wrong? We've really fundamentally lost something that you have to have a democracy. You have to have a sense of right and wrong and decency. We need to recognize, the genius of Mahatma Gandhi. He didn't take guns up against the British, which the Indians could have done, pushed the British out. He defeated them. Took a long time, but he defeated them with a moral campaign. And the Democrats have got to find a way, I think, to sell this. I mean, they're searching around. And the elections that are going on today in a number of places, pay close attention to the margins by which people win. Pay close attention to how well Abigail Spanberger does in Virginia, a state that's purplish, turning blue a little bit, but purplish. Pay attention to by how big the margin is for Mamdani in New York City. And then after the election, by the way, the thing with Mamdani will be, can you deliver on what you said? He's limited himself to items where the mayor actually has power to do things, but he has to have money. He'll have to redistribute budgets to do it. But if he delivers, I think there's an important message for the Democrats. If you just run on Donald is bad, Donald is corrupt, Donald is incompetent, you're not going to turn people. What you want to run on is, that's true, and here's what we're going to do for you. We're going to improve wages. We're going to lower costs. We're going to get rid of the superfluous healthcare industry, and you're still going to get to see the doctor of your choice.
Yeah, there have to be some populist notions in there, and even some of Mamdani's stuff he's going to need a little help from Albany. He's going to need a little help from the state, maybe on taxes or this sort of thing to help pay for what he's talking about. And he's going to have
Donald Trump do everything he can to tie him up and make life difficult.
That is so true. I wanted to play David real quick, but we're out of time, but I wanted him to, because he referenced the Mike Johnson, MAGA Mike, doing his, I don't know anything about it. Gosh, I just heard about that. Wow. You'll have to ask. Can you have that supercut? This is it. This is what David's talking about. When asked about the pardon of the Binance head, it was completely corrupt and any number of other things. Here is what Mike Johnson had to say over and over.
I don't know anything about that. I didn't see the interview. You have to ask the president about that. I don't know any of the details of that yet. I just heard about that literally. I was walking in. I don't know the details about that. I've just read it. I didn't talk with him about that. I don't know the latest developments. That's the first I've heard of that. I don't know anything about it. I don't know what you're talking about with the children. I haven't seen that, so I'm not going to comment on it.
Yeah, that's the thing.
The question to ask him after so many of these would be to say, Speaker Johnson, you have now said X number of times about issues I don't know. Why should you be in that job? You apparently aren't working.
There is that. David, thank you for your time every week. Such a pleasure. We'll link to this piece.
Yeah,
How
I hope people
America's
read it. It's just a book review. It's not very long, but it will teach you a great deal about taxes in America and what's really going on. And I'm going to just point out one thing to intrigue people. You might think that because of all the talk in America about taxes are bad, taxes are too high. I was on overseas TV today with a Republican strategist. We have to lower taxes. That's the number one most important thing. We founded this country for the very purpose of the Constitution of this country, the Second American Republic. The reason we established the Constitution is first and foremost so we could tax ourselves. That's the primary purpose of this country's creation, was to tax ourselves. And once you understand that and why.
Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.